The war had left deep scars on both the Earth and its scattered colonies. For 3 long years, humanity had been pushed to the brink, forced to fight against a power older and far larger than they had ever imagined. The Orales Dominion had ruled the stars for millennia. To them, history was a cycle of conquest: find, subjugate, assimilate, repeat. They believed that every species could be bent, that every culture could be reshaped into another cog in their empire's endless machine. But humanity was different. Born on a world that had tried to kill them at every turn, humans had learned not just to survive, but to adapt and overcome. They were a species that thrived in adversity. And now, standing before the Dominion's rulers, Envoy Selene Ward embodied that defiance. The council chamber glimmered like a jewel carved from an alien dream. Shimmering walls of crystal cast rippling blue light over the Dominion's leaders, creatures of shapes and colors beyond imagination. The luminary, beings of living crystal, chimed softly as they shifted in amusement. The shadowy umbrics rippled like smoke in dim light, their whispers like cold wind. Others watched in silence, their faces carved with contemptuous smiles. At the center, on a throne that floated in midair, sat Sovereign Kael'vrix, a towering reptilian figure draped in regal armor. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he studied the human envoy, the corners of his jagged mouth curling into a sneer. "So the humans speak again," he said, his voice echoing like grinding metal. "Have you finally come to kneel, to beg for the lives of your pitiful worlds?" Laughter rippled across the council. To them, humanity was an amusing anomaly, a loud, defiant species that had managed to hold out far longer than expected. But like all others, they would eventually be crushed and reshaped to serve. Selene Ward did not flinch. She stood tall, her eyes unwavering, her voice calm yet cutting through the laughter like a blade. "Sovereign Kael'vrix, members of the Dominion Council." Her words carried the weight of 3 years of blood and sacrifice. "For generations, you have ruled by fear and domination. You have enslaved species, erased cultures, and called it order. We came to you offering peace, trade, and cooperation. We offered a path forward together. And in return, you burned our colonies, enslaved our people, and spat on every offer of friendship." Kael'vrix leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You speak of peace now. Do you think words can undo what has already begun? You are nothing. Your kind is weak, fragile, temporary. We are eternal. We have consumed civilizations that were building fleets when your ancestors still huddled in caves. You should beg for our mercy, little human." Selene's expression did not change. She let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the weight of her next words build. "We are not like the others you conquered." Her voice was steady, cold, and resolute. "This is not surrender. This is your final warning. Withdraw your fleets, leave our worlds, return our colonies. You have 72 hours. The laughter stopped. Kael'vrix's scales darkened, a visible sign of rising anger. "You dare make demands of me, of the Dominion?" Selene leaned forward slightly, her eyes burning with quiet intensity. "We dare because we are not what you think we are. You see weakness where there is resilience. You see division where there is unity. You see a fragile species, yet you have never understood what makes us human." The chamber grew silent. Even the alien counselors who had been so eager to mock her now stared with something that felt disturbingly like unease. Then she said it, the words that would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. "We conquer, we consume, you have been warned." The screen went dark. For a long moment the chamber remained silent. Even the faint hum of the Dominion's crystalline architecture seemed to fade. Sovereign Kael'vrix stared at the blank screen, his 4 eyes narrowing to slits. Slowly his clawed hands tightened on the arms of his throne. "Foolish creatures," he hissed at last. "They think they can frighten us with empty threats." But deep inside, a small, unfamiliar feeling stirred in him, one he had not felt in centuries. It was not fear, not yet, but it was doubt. And doubt, history had always taught, was the first seed of downfall. Far away, aboard the HMS Resolute, Selene Ward exhaled slowly. She knew what she had just done. There would be no more negotiations, no more diplomacy. The next moves would decide whether humanity would rise or vanish forever. Admiral Arya Kalen, watching from the command deck, placed a hand on Selene's shoulder. "They've had their chance," she said quietly. "Yes," Selene replied, her voice steady. "Now they'll see what humanity truly is." Outside the viewport, the stars shimmered in cold silence as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The countdown to the end, or to something far greater, had begun. Deep within the armored decks of the HMS Resolute, far from the cold starlight outside, the heart of humanity's final plan was awakening. The corridors here were silent, lined with reinforced bulkheads etched with warning sigils. Few knew what lay beyond these doors, and even fewer understood its true purpose. Dr. Ilara Miles stood at the center of a vast research chamber, her pale hands hovering above a console of softly glowing panels. Around her, sealed containers lined the walls, each humming with quiet, restrained power. Inside them, microscopic machines lay dormant, billions of nanites, no larger than a grain of dust, yet capable of reshaping reality itself. She stared at them for a moment, feeling the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. She had begun this project long before the war, back when humanity's first contact with the Orali's dominion had seemed a miracle, not a curse. Even then, she had known the truth: contact with an empire built on subjugation could only end one way. The Dominion had grown complacent. Millennia of peace and effortless rule had made them arrogant. They wielded incredible technology, yet they no longer questioned or innovated. They had forgotten that progress required struggle, that power demanded sacrifice. Humanity, by contrast, had never known peace for long. From the dawn of their history, they had fought each other, survived harsh climates, endured famine, disease, and endless conflict. Through that struggle, they had learned a brutal lesson: survival belonged to those who adapted fastest. And that was the philosophy behind Project Ascendant. Ilara placed her hand on the activation console. Lights rippled through the chamber as the containment units began to hum louder. The nanites inside stirred, their structures shifting in ways invisible to the naked eye. Around her, her team of scientists worked with quiet precision. These were men and women who had sacrificed families, futures, and even their humanity to create the weapon that could change everything. They had long abandoned the illusion that this war could be won by strength alone. "This is it," whispered Dr. Nova Callan, her second-in-command. Her eyes reflected both fear and awe. "Once we start, there's no turning back." Ilara nodded, her expression unreadable. "We never had a choice. Every colony they burned, every child they enslaved, this is their legacy. Now it becomes ours." She looked around at her team. "Remember why we built this. This isn't just a weapon, it's a chance to rebuild the galaxy, not in their image, but in ours. If we win, we won't repeat their mistakes. We'll give every species the choice they were denied." There was a long silence. Many of the scientists had lost loved ones to the Dominion's cruelty. Some had been prisoners, rescued after years in labor camps. Their faces carried both grief and grim resolve. At last, Ilara gave the order: "Begin activation sequence." The room erupted into motion. Technicians moved from station to station, entering commands they had rehearsed countless times. Warning sirens pulsed softly as the nanite chambers powered up, their energy readings spiking far beyond what alien engineering considered safe. Above the consoles, holographic models of the nanite swarms came to life, shimmering clouds of silver specks, capable of dismantling matter at the molecular level and reshaping it into something new. But they were not built to destroy. That was what made them truly terrifying. Phase 1, structural integrity stable, a technician called out. Phase 2, core AI network linking, another added. Ilara watched as the data scrolled across her screen, her fingers trembling slightly. These machines were more than tools. They were the embodiment of humanity's most dangerous philosophy: the refusal to accept limits. Long ago, humans had built fire, weapons, machines, and cities, always pushing past the boundaries of what was considered possible. The Dominion, with all its power, had stagnated, believing it had already reached perfection. But perfection was an illusion. "Nanite intelligence synchronization complete," Nova reported softly. Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the enormity of what they were about to unleash. Power is not evil in itself, she thought. It is how it is used that defines its nature. "This is not about conquest," she whispered, though the words felt like both hope and warning. "It's about survival and what we do after survival." Her voice hardened as she gave the final command: "Activate Project Ascendant." The containers erupted in a soft, resonant hum. Microscopic machines awoke, their dormant structures unfolding into intricate patterns beyond human comprehension. They were not alive, not in the way most understood life, yet they carried within them a seed of purpose. On the upper decks, Admiral Aria Kalin received the notification. She stood silently, gazing out at the endless stars. Commander Jackson Reeve approached, his face pale. "Admiral," he said softly, "it's begun. Ascendant is online." Kalin's eyes did not leave the viewport. "Good," she replied. "Then the galaxy is about to learn why we survived when so many others didn't." She turned slightly toward Reeve, her voice cold and steady. "They think power comes from dominance. They've forgotten the truth. Power comes from the will to change, and no one changes like us. Far below, the nanite swarms pulsed with light as they linked together, forming the first pieces of something far greater than any single human or alien could comprehend. The countdown had begun, not just to the next battle, but to the reshaping of the galaxy itself. While humanity awakened its most dangerous creation deep within the HMS Resolute, the Orali's Dominion prepared for what it believed would be the final act of the war. In the capital system of the Dominion, a fleet yard stretched across the void like a glittering web of steel and crystal. Vast ship constructors, larger than cities, churned endlessly, birthing warships that gleamed with alien perfection. Their hulls were forged from metals drawn from dead stars. Their engines pulsed with energies unknown to humankind. The Dominion had built these ships for millennia, confident that no enemy could ever match their power. Standing on the bridge of his massive flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Warlord Thrin Korvac surveyed the countless vessels assembling under his command. He was a creature bred for war, his body encased in natural armor as dark as volcanic glass, his claws sharp enough to rend steel. His gaze swept across the viewing panels, taking in the sight of row after row of Dominion battleships, carriers, and dreadnoughts falling into formation. "This is the largest fleet our people have ever assembled," Korvac declared, his deep voice reverberating through the command deck. 10,000 ships, enough to drown the humans in fire and silence their defiance forever. His officers, members of the warrior caste, bowed their heads in grim reverence. They were beings raised to see war as holy duty. Victory was their birthright, defeat was unthinkable. Yet beneath their expressions of pride there was a quiet unease, an emotion few of them would admit aloud. The humans had lasted far longer than any of them expected. Other species had fallen in months, some in mere weeks. But humanity had refused to die, and there were whispers, rumors of impossible human victories, of ships that moved too quickly, weapons that struck with terrifying precision. One of Korvac's advisors, a tall crystalline luminary named Zirin, spoke with a voice like chimes. "Warlord, intelligence suggests the humans have been studying our technology. It is possible they have adapted it." Korvac turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "Adapted? They are scavengers playing with scraps. Do not mistake clever tricks for strength. They are still nothing before the might of the Dominion." But another officer, an Umbrix tactician whose shadowy form flickered with unease, dared to speak. "And yet, my lord, we have lost more ships than predicted. Their resistance does not follow the patterns of our previous conquests." Korvac's clawed hand slammed against the armrest of his command throne, sending a sharp crack through the air. "Enough, they are vermin. They resist because we have allowed them to. When we strike with the full power of the Dominion, there will be nothing left to resist." As his words echoed through the deck, massive drums of energy thundered through the shipyards. Engines ignited as the first lines of ships began their march into the void, each vessel sliding gracefully into formation like soldiers in a perfect parade. From orbit, the sight was breathtaking. 10,000 ships, their weapons bristling with unimaginable power, a fleet so vast it eclipsed the stars themselves. In the council chambers far above the fleet yard, Sovereign Kaelvrix watched the mobilization with satisfaction. His 4 eyes glimmered with cruel confidence. "Let them speak of warnings," he said softly, almost to himself. "Let them dream of resistance. They will learn, as all have learned, that the Dominion is eternal." A younger officer at his side, a commander named Virak, shifted uneasily. He had studied the human battles, seen the strange patterns in their tactics, but he remained silent. In the Dominion, questioning a superior was dangerous, and Korvac's pride was legendary. Meanwhile, across human space, the HMS Resolute and its allied fleets detected the surge of Dominion activity. Commander Jackson Reeve reviewed the sensor data, his brow furrowing. "They're mobilizing everything," he muttered. 17 systems showing fleet movements, 10,000 ships, they're throwing it all at us." Admiral Arya Kalin stood at his side, her face unreadable. "Good," she said quietly. "That's exactly what we need them to do." Reeve glanced at her in shock. "You expected this?" Kalin turned toward the star map, her eyes hard as steel. "Of course, they still believe this war is about ships and guns. They don't understand what's coming." Far away in the hidden labs of Project Ascendant, the nanite swarms continued to awaken. Their soft hum was like the sound of inevitability, a quiet promise that the old order of the galaxy was about to end. And for the first time in countless centuries, the Dominion was marching toward a battle it could not win. The colony world of Nova Asteris hung like a fragile jewel against the blackness of space. its oceans glimmering in hues of sapphire and emerald. Once a thriving human settlement, it had been scarred by raids and bombardments. Cities that had once hummed with life now stood in silence, their people hidden deep within underground shelters, waiting for a battle that would decide their future. Far above the planet, Commodore Elias Rourke, commander of the HMS Vanguard, stood on his bridge in utter stillness. Before him, sensor displays painted a terrifying picture. The Dominion fleet had arrived. 10,000 ships filled the void like a moving wall of fire and steel, their formations flawless, their weapons fully charged. Beside him, Colonel Marin Holt, head of planetary defenses, spoke quietly but firmly. "That is more firepower than any fleet in history. On paper, we are already dead." Rourke did not turn to face her. His eyes remained fixed on the incoming armada. "We knew this day would come. We trained for it. They believe numbers will crush us. They've forgotten that wars are not won by numbers alone." On the Dominion flagship, Warlord Thrin Korvac looked at the meager human defenses with a sneer. 300 ships, he said with contempt. "They've gathered every vessel they have, and still they are insects before us." His second-in-command, Virak, nodded reluctantly. "They are outnumbered 30-1. Victory will be swift." Korvac raised his clawed hand, giving the order his people had waited years to hear. "Commence the final assault, burn their fleets, reduce their colonies to ash, show the galaxy what becomes of defiance." The Dominion armada moved as one. Thousands of weapons flared to life, their combined energy lighting the void like a false sunrise. Lances of plasma and particle beams screamed across the darkness, converging on the human ships. But when the blinding light faded, the targets were gone. Korvac's eyes widened. "What?" Across the human fleet, Rourke's voice rang out. "Phase 1 execute." Suddenly, the HMS Vanguard and its accompanying destroyers reappeared behind the Dominion's front line, their weapons already firing. Modified jump drives, built from alien technology but pushed beyond safe limits by human ingenuity, allowed ships to make impossible short-range jumps. Explosions blossomed in the Dominion ranks as their rear ships were torn apart by the sudden ambush. "They're everywhere," a Dominion officer cried. "Sensors cannot track their positions. It's not possible." Virak shouted, his form flickering with agitation. "No ship can move like this." But humanity had spent 3 years studying every scrap of alien technology they could get their hands on. Every lost battle, every captured vessel, every piece of salvaged equipment had been a lesson. The Dominion had stagnated. Humanity had innovated. The human ships struck in coordinated waves, vanishing and reappearing like phantoms. Each time they attacked, more Dominion ships fell, their perfect formations collapsing under the sudden chaos. And then Phase 2 began. From the orbit of Nova Asteris, seemingly lifeless asteroids began to shift. Panels unfolded, revealing sleek weapons platforms hidden for years in the system. These platforms fired not beams of energy, but shimmering clouds of nanites, silver swarms that danced across the void like glimmering mist. The first Dominion battleship hit by the swarm simply disintegrated. Its armor crumbled into metallic dust that reformed into dozens of small, angular fighter craft. The Dominion crews screamed as their own weapons were consumed and rebuilt in seconds. "What is this?" Korvac roared, his voice trembling with fury. The crystalline Luminari advisor Zirin stared at the readings in horror. "They are converting our ships, turning them into theirs." The human fleet, once a mere 300 vessels, began to swell. Each destroyed Dominion ship became raw material for new weapons, new fighters, new warships. It was like watching an enemy grow stronger with every victory you gave them. On the planet's surface, Colonel Holt monitored ground defenses as alien dropships tried to pierce the orbital battle. The first transports managed to land, their elite warriors pouring out in perfect formation. They expected frightened colonists. What they found were soldiers waiting for them, men and women enhanced by the same nanites that fueled humanity's terrifying new weapons. One Dominion warrior drove a plasma blade into a human soldier, expecting him to fall. Instead, the man staggered, his blood glowing faintly silver as the wound sealed before the alien's eyes. The soldier's gaze hardened, his body stronger than before, and he tore the weapon from his attacker's hands. "You thought we would die so easily," he growled. "You thought wrong." Across the battlefield, fallen humans began to rise, their wounds knitting together. Their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. With every alien weapon they captured, their firepower increased. On the flagship, Korvac finally felt it, the creeping sensation of fear. "Retreat," he ordered, his voice breaking for the first time in his life. All ships retreat now, but it was too late. Their hyperspace drives, infected by nanites carried through the debris of battle, failed one by one. Ships exploded as their own systems turned against them. By the time the surviving Dominion vessels fled, over 7,000 ships had been destroyed or converted. Humanity's fleet had doubled in size. On the bridge of the HMS Vanguard, Rourke watched the last enemy ships vanish into hyperspace. He exhaled slowly, the weight of what had just happened settling over him. Phase 3 is next, he said quietly to Holt. And after that, they'll finally understand what we are. Far away, aboard the HMS Resolute, Admiral Kalin received the battle report. She allowed herself a brief, cold smile. They still think they're fighting a war, she said softly. They have no idea what's coming. Outside, the stars of Nova Asteris burned brighter than ever, silent witnesses to the moment the balance of power in the galaxy began to shift forever. The wreckage of battle drifted silently through the void above Nova Asteris. Broken hulls of Dominion warships, the shattered remains of once proud vessels that had terrorized countless species. But this debris was not lifeless. It shimmered faintly, as though threads of silver light wove through the wreckage, binding and reshaping it. At the heart of this strange transformation were the nanites, billions upon billions of microscopic machines that moved like a living tide. They swarmed across broken metal, their collective hum so faint it was almost inaudible, yet it carried a weight of inevitability. Every Dominion warship destroyed in the battle became raw material for something new, something human. On the bridge of the HMS Vanguard, Commodore Elias Rourke watched in awe as fragments of alien dreadnoughts merged into sleek, angular ships unlike anything humanity had built before. Fighter craft unfolded from clouds of glittering dust, their engines roaring to life with an energy efficiency the Dominion had never achieved. Colonel Marin Holt, standing beside him, could only whisper, "It's like they are alive." Rourke nodded. "They are, in a way." Deep within the converted wreckage, the nanites were not merely repairing, they were rewriting. Dominion alloys were reforged into materials stronger than their originals. Alien weapons were dismantled, studied at impossible speeds, and rebuilt into deadlier, more efficient designs. But the nanites' most terrifying ability was not in what they built, it was in what they changed. On one of the captured Dominion ships, a group of surviving crew members huddled together, their claws gripping their weapons tightly. They whispered frantic prayers in their guttural language, praying for rescue that would never come. The lights flickered, the air tasted metallic, and then the walls themselves began to shift. The crew watched in horror as their own ship's controls twisted and reshaped, interfaces changing into human configurations. Their weapons grew hot, melting in their hands as nanites seeped through the grips and remade them into alien tools they no longer recognized. One soldier screamed as silver threads crawled up his arm, reshaping his armor into something unfamiliar. His comrades tried to tear it away, but the nanites only spread faster, their microscopic work unstoppable. Moments later, the soldier rose to his feet, different. Eyes glowed faintly with mechanical light. He looked at his former comrades, but there was no malice in his gaze, only a strange, unsettling calm. "We can see more now," he said in a voice that was both his and not his. "We understand, you will too." Panic erupted, blades slashed, weapons fired, but everything they did only hastened their own assimilation. Nanites poured from the walls like quicksilver, engulfing the survivors. The ship fell silent, and then minutes later, its engines roared to life, no longer under Dominion control. Back on the HMS Resolute, Dr. Alara Miles studied the live feeds with grim satisfaction. "Phase 2 is exceeding expectations," she reported to Admiral Aria Kalin. "Every destroyed ship becomes a new asset. Every captured weapon becomes a better version of itself. We are not just growing stronger, we are evolving faster than they can comprehend." Commander Jackson Reeves stepped forward, uneasy. "And what about the crews we're converting?" Alara paused, her expression unreadable. "They are not forced. The nanites give them a choice. They can resist, but the more they resist, the more they see. Eventually they understand why we fight." Kalin's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if they refuse," Alara met her gaze, "then they become part of something greater anyway. But most don't refuse for long. They realize we are not enslaving them, we are improving them." There was a heavy silence. Even Reeve, who had seen countless battles, felt a chill run down his spine. On Nova Asteris, the ground battle raged on. Dominion warriors, once the terror of 1,000 worlds, found themselves facing an enemy that simply would not die. Human soldiers, enhanced by nanites, fought with a precision and ferocity that no amount of training could match. Private Jonas Kale, a young Marine barely out of training, took a plasma blast to the chest and collapsed. Moments later, his body arched as the nanites in his blood activated. The wound sealed and his breath returned deeper, steadier than before. When he rose, his movements were smoother, his aim sharper. He picked up the alien rifle that had killed him, its design already shifting under the touch of nanites, reshaping into a human-compatible weapon. Around him, more soldiers fell and rose again, each death only making them more formidable. The Dominion forces faltered. For the first time in their proud history, they felt what so many others had felt under their rule: hopelessness. From orbit, Admiral Kalen's voice carried through every human channel. They thought we would break, they thought we would beg, but we are not like the others they conquered. Every loss we take becomes their loss. Every weapon they fire becomes our strength. We do not just fight, we conquer, we consume. The words resonated across the battlefield. The human forces pressed forward with renewed resolve, not just soldiers, but the living embodiment of a terrifying new kind of war, one that could not be stopped, one that only grew stronger with every battle fought. In that moment, the Dominion realized that this was no ordinary war. It was evolution, and they were on the wrong side of it. The battle over Nova Asteris was no longer a clash between two fleets. It had become a spectacle of horror for the Orales Dominion, a nightmare where every act of aggression only fed the enemy. Across the shattered remains of the battlefield, Dominion ships burned and twisted in the cold void, only to be reborn as human vessels. Fighters, bombers, and frigates, once alien in design, now soared through space with new hulls and new weapons. Their systems seamlessly integrated into humanity's growing war network. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Warlord Thrin Korvac watched helplessly as the battle slipped through his claws. Ships that had served his empire for centuries were vanishing into clouds of silver light, reappearing moments later as weapons for the very enemy they had come to destroy. His officers shouted frantic updates. 7th Fleet annihilated. Rear flank breached by ships we just lost minutes ago. They are multiplying, my lord. Every vessel we lose returns as one of theirs. Korvac's 4 eyes widened, his armored claws digging into the armrest of his command throne. Impossible, nothing grows like this, nothing fights like this. But deep down, the seed of fear planted in the Dominion's heart began to sprout. Meanwhile, aboard the HMS Vanguard, Commodore Elias Rourke stood calmly amidst the chaos of victory. His crew moved with precision, every action rehearsed through years of preparation. They knew this battle was not just about survival, it was about changing the rules of war itself. Colonel Marin Holt stepped closer, her face pale. "We've doubled our fleet numbers in less than an hour. I've never seen anything like this. Elias, this isn't a battle anymore, it's transformation." Rourke's gaze remained fixed on the unfolding chaos. "That's the point, Colonel. We were never going to beat them with brute force. We had to become something they couldn't understand, and now," he allowed himself a rare, cold smile, "now they understand nothing." Across the Dominion fleet, panic spread like wildfire. Veterans who had once believed in their empire's eternal dominance found themselves questioning everything they had been taught. Aboard a mid-sized Dominion cruiser, Commander Virak stared at his malfunctioning controls. The displays were no longer showing Dominion code, they were rewriting themselves into human symbols. He watched in terror as his ship's own weapons locked onto its allies. "What have we unleashed?" he whispered as his crew began screaming for help that would never arrive. Moments later, the cruiser joined the enemy formation, its systems completely converted. Back in the Dominion capital, Sovereign Kaelvrix received report after report, losses far beyond anything his empire had suffered in centuries. The room grew silent as one final transmission came through. "My sovereign," said the shattered voice of a surviving officer, "they are not fighting us, they are consuming us." Kaelvrix's scales turned a sickly pale hue. For the first time in his long reign, he felt something alien and unwelcome: helplessness. In human space, Admiral Aria Kalen stood in the command center of the HMS Resolute, her gaze fixed on the tactical map. Human fleets, now swollen with ships built from converted Dominion wreckage, moved with perfect synchronization. Beside her, Commander Jackson Reeves spoke softly. "Admiral, they are retreating. What's left of them is running." Kalen's expression was unreadable. "Good, let them run. Let them tell their sovereign what we are." Reeve turned to her, his voice quiet but uneasy. "Do you think they understand now?" Kalen's eyes hardened, her voice cold and absolute. "They will. The Dominion believes power is domination, but power is the ability to change faster, harder, more completely than anyone else, and no one adapts like us. Across the battlefields of Nova Asteris, human soldiers fought with a terrifying new confidence. Death was no longer the end, it was an opportunity. Each fallen soldier who rose again became proof of a truth the Dominion could no longer deny: humanity could not be broken. The once proud warriors of the Dominion faltered. For centuries they had marched across the stars, certain of their supremacy. But now, for the first time, they faced an enemy that did not fear them, did not kneel, and did not die. As the last surviving Dominion ships fled into hyperspace, they carried with them stories that would shatter the illusions of their empire. Tales of an enemy that grew stronger with every loss, an enemy that could not be outnumbered, outgunned, or outlasted, an enemy that had learned how to turn defeat into power. Aboard the HMS Vanguard, Rourke stood silently as the tactical displays shifted, showing not just victory but something greater. "Phase 3, he said at last, his voice low but resolute. "Begin preparations. They've seen what we can do in battle. Now they're going to see what we can do to their worlds." Far away, Sovereign Kaelvric stood in the throne chamber of his empire, his claws tightening in anger and disbelief. "They think they can change the galaxy," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. But deep within, another voice whispered a truth he could not bear to face. Perhaps they already have. 6 hours after the Dominion's retreat from Nova Asteris, the human fleet no longer looked like the force that had begun the battle. Its numbers had swelled with ships forged from the enemy's own wreckage. Its weapons were more advanced, more efficient, more lethal. The nanites had done their work well. But the fleet was no longer just a military power, it was an instrument of transformation. In a vast chamber aboard the HMS Resolute, Dr. Ilara Miles and Dr. Nova Callan stood side by side, their faces illuminated by the soft silver glow of the nanite cores suspended in containment fields. The cores pulsed gently as though breathing. "Phase 3 is ready," Nova reported quietly. "The swarm is stable, target worlds have been mapped. Once deployed, there is no reversing this." Ilara's gaze lingered on the cores. She understood the weight of what was about to happen. "It's not just a weapon anymore," she murmured. "It's a choice. One we're about to give them, whether they want it or not." The first target was Veraxis Prime, an industrial world vital to the Dominion war machine. Orbiting above the planet, the newly expanded human fleet formed a protective ring as countless pods detached from their ships. From the ground, the pods looked like harmless meteors streaking across the sky in waves of silver light. When they opened, they released the gray swarm. Billions of nanites spread across the atmosphere like invisible mist, seeping into every structure, every machine, every weapon. They did not destroy, they rewrote. Factories that had once forged engines for Dominion warships suddenly found their machines operating faster, producing components with impossible precision. Cities flickered with strange new power as alien technology shifted into unfamiliar but more efficient forms. At first, panic swept through the streets. Dominion citizens fled as their tools and devices changed before their eyes. A worker in a starship foundry dropped his welding tool in terror as it melted and reformed into something sleeker, lighter, yet far more powerful. But then something unexpected happened. The nanites connected to the very systems the citizens relied upon, creating seamless networks that allowed them to share knowledge instantly. A mechanic on one side of the planet suddenly understood how to improve an energy grid she had never seen before. A scientist felt ideas forming in his mind, concepts that had been buried for centuries under Dominion stagnation. It was not mind control, it was clarity. For the first time in their lives, they were free to think, to imagine, to create without fear of their empire's punishments. In the Dominion capital, Sovereign Kaelvric received frantic reports. "My sovereign," a trembling officer said, "the humans are not destroying the worlds they take, they are transforming them. The people are helping them." Kaelvric slammed a clawed fist onto his throne. Helping them, they are traitors, but deep inside he feared the truth. On the ground of Veraxis Prime, Commander Jackson Reeve led the first wave of human marines, yet there was little resistance. Many of the Dominion citizens who had once feared humanity now approached cautiously, their eyes filled with confusion but also wonder. One alien worker, his crystalline body reflecting the silver light of the nanites, stepped forward and spoke haltingly in the human trade language. "You do not kill, you give us more." Reeve lowered his weapon slightly. We're not here to enslave you. We're here to give you what your empire never did, a future you choose for yourself. The alien tilted its head as though hearing something beyond words. I understand. High above the planet, Alara monitored the swarm's progress. Conversion at 60%, Nova reported. No major resistance detected. Integration is proceeding faster than expected. Alara closed her eyes. It was working not through fear, not through domination, but by offering something better than oppression. By the end of the first day, Veraxis Prime was no longer a Dominion world. Its factories now built human-designed ships, with alien citizens working willingly at the production lines. Knowledge flowed freely across the new network, engineers, scientists, and builders of two species collaborating as though they had always been one people. For the first time in centuries, the citizens of the Dominion felt hope. In the War Council chambers, Kaelvric stared at the reports coming in from across his empire. World after world was falling, not because humanity had destroyed them, but because his people were choosing to join their enemy. No, he whispered, his claws trembling. This cannot be happening. They are ours. They are. He stopped. A terrifying thought struck him. Maybe they were never truly ours to begin with. On the bridge of the HMS Resolute, Admiral Kalen watched as reports of surrender and integration poured in. Entire star systems were joining humanity, not out of fear, but out of desire. They were never loyal to the Dominion, she said softly. They were loyal to survival, and we've just given them something worth surviving for. Far below, the gray swarm continued its quiet, relentless work, rebuilding, reshaping, and connecting everything it touched. This was not the conquest the Dominion had always feared. This was something far worse. It was change. The Orales Dominion, an empire that had ruled the stars for millennia, had always seemed unshakable. Its fleets were vast, its rulers feared, and its subjects obedient. For countless generations, it had survived by convincing every conquered species that resistance was futile, that the Dominion's power was absolute. But now, for the first time in its long history, its own citizens were no longer afraid. On worlds across the empire, the gray swarm spread like a silent revolution. Cities that had once been centers of industry for the Dominion war machine now thrummed with a new purpose. Factories once bound to the empires were producing ships for humanity, sleeker, faster, more powerful than any that had come before. Yet the most shocking change was not technological, it was cultural. Workers who had once labored under strict control found themselves free to think, to create, to innovate. Soldiers who had been taught loyalty through fear began questioning why they were fighting for rulers who had never valued them. The Dominion had believed that control came from strength. Humanity had shown that true power came from offering something better. Captain Zalen Kryn, a high-ranking Umbrix telepath, had once been one of the Dominion's most loyal officers. She had orchestrated countless victories through her psychic coordination of Dominion fleets. Captured at Nova Asteris, she had expected imprisonment or death. Instead, she found herself speaking with Dr. Alara Miles. "We don't want to erase you," Alara said gently. "We want to show you what you could become." Zalen had laughed bitterly. "I have seen what you humans do. You consume, you conquer." "Yes," Alara replied calmly, "but not the way you think. We take what is broken and make it better. You've spent your entire life serving an empire that uses you as a tool. You've never been free." The nanites offered Zalen a choice. At first, she resisted. But then her mind opened, not because she was forced, but because she finally saw. For the first time, she felt what it was like to be connected, not as a servant, but as an equal. Her telepathic abilities, once confined to military orders, now linked her to thousands of minds, human and alien alike, working together, sharing thoughts, ideas, and dreams. When Zalen emerged from the integration process 3 days later, she was still herself, but she was also more, and she was not alone. Across the Empire, Luminari scientists, Umbrix tacticians, and countless other alien specialists began defecting, not because they were conquered, but because they were valued. Within the Dominion's War Council, cracks began to form. Virak, the commander who had witnessed humanity's impossible tactics firsthand, now spoke openly. "My sovereign, this war is lost. Our people are choosing to join them. The more we fight, the stronger they become. This is no longer a war of fleets, it is a war of ideas, and we have already lost it." Kaelvric slammed a clawed fist onto his throne. "You speak treason." Virak met his gaze without fear for the first time. "No, I speak truth. For centuries we ruled through fear, they rule through choice. And choice is stronger." Entire worlds began declaring independence from the Dominion, not to form their own governments, but to volunteer to join humanity's growing network. Messages poured in from across the stars. We surrender not out of fear but because we wish to stand with you. We no longer serve the Dominion, we choose to build something greater. Take our ships, take our knowledge, take us, we want to be part of this future. Kaelvrix, once proud and untouchable, now found himself alone. Reports flooded in, 7 systems defected overnight. Fleets refused to follow orders, crews are joining the humans voluntarily. Our own commanders are disappearing. For the first time, the Sovereign realized the terrible truth. He had not lost a war, he had lost an empire. On the HMS Resolute, Admiral Aria Kalin read the incoming transmissions. System after system pledged allegiance not to Earth, but to the vision humanity had offered. She turned to Commander Jackson Reeve, her expression unreadable. They finally understand, she said softly. Reeve's voice was hushed. And now, Kalin's eyes hardened. Now we finish what we started. Far across the stars, Captain Zaylin Kryn stood aboard her new vessel, a ship born of both human and Umbrix design. She looked out into the void, no longer a tool of oppression, but a partner in something far greater. We were always told freedom was chaos, she whispered. But this is order with purpose. And she knew then that the Dominion's age was over, not because humanity had destroyed it, but because its own people had chosen to leave it behind. 6 months had passed since the fall of the Orali's Dominion. What had once been a galaxy ruled by fear was now shifting toward something entirely new. World by world, species by species, the Dominion's former subjects had chosen a different path, not servitude under a new master, but partnership in a shared destiny. On the once imperial capital world, towering crystalline structures that had symbolized oppression for millennia now pulsed with soft blue light. The great halls of government, once silent chambers of decrees, had become places of open councils, where humans and aliens alike debated and shared ideas as equals. The transformation was not just political, it was cultural. For the first time in history, the luminary beings of living crystal collaborated openly with human engineers. Their extraordinary computational abilities solved equations once thought impossible, while human creativity turned solutions into practical inventions. The Umbrix, shadowy telepaths who had once been feared manipulators, now served as coordinators of interstellar communication, linking minds across light years to create a level of unity that no single species could have achieved alone. The Elder Seraphs, ancient watchers who had observed countless civilizations rise and fall, now shared knowledge that had been locked away for millions of years. Their vast memories became part of a shared network of understanding, ensuring that no wisdom would ever be lost to time again. In orbit above the former capital, Admiral Aria Kalin stood at the observation deck of the HMS Resolute, gazing down at the transformed world. "They've adapted faster than even we expected," said Commander Jackson Reeve, standing beside her. Kalin nodded slowly. "They were never incapable. They were simply never allowed to grow." Reeve glanced at her. "And now, Kalin said quietly, "we build a galaxy where every voice matters, where power isn't taken but shared. That's why we fought, not to rule but to make this possible." Below in the capital's main square, Captain Zaylin Kryn, the former Umbrix officer, stood before a vast gathering of humans and aliens. Her voice carried through the air, amplified not by machines, but by her own telepathic projection linking minds together. "For so long we believed freedom was chaos, that unity required chains. But today we stand as proof that cooperation is not weakness, it is the truest form of strength." The crowd responded with a wave of emotion, hope, pride, and determination flowing as one. In a massive orbital shipyard, vessels unlike anything seen before took shape. These were not merely human ships. They were living constructs forged from matter altered by nanites, their designs incorporating the brilliance of every species that had joined the network. Each ship could think, adapt, and grow. They were not tools of conquest, but partners, a living fleet that would one day carry the united civilizations to the farthest stars. Inside one of these new vessels, Dr. Ilara Miles and Dr. Nova Callan worked with a team that included humans, Luminari, Umbrix, and Seraphs. "Our breakthroughs in energy transfer alone will reshape entire worlds," Nova said with wonder. Ilara nodded. "This is what Ascendant was always meant to be, not just survival, but rebirth. We've shown them what happens when knowledge isn't hoarded by the few, but shared by all." The most remarkable change was not in technology, but in values. Former Dominion soldiers, once feared as brutal enforcers, now helped defend trade routes and colonies, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in what they were building. Children of different species studied together, learning not only science and history, but the lessons of a war that had nearly consumed the galaxy, lessons of arrogance, greed, and the price of stagnation. As reports came in from across the stars, Kalen felt a strange, quiet pride. Humanity had begun this war as an underdog, struggling to survive. But their greatest victory had not been in battle. It had been in showing the galaxy a better way to live. One evening, as the sun set over the alien skyline, Zaylin Kryn walked alongside Kalen. "You've done something no empire ever could," Zaylin said softly. "You didn't just win, you changed us." Kalen looked at her expression calm but resolute. "We didn't win alone, none of us could have. We only gave the galaxy a choice and they took it." Zaylin nodded slowly. "So what now?" Kalen turned her gaze toward the stars where new ships awaited their first journeys. "Now," she said, her voice steady, "we see how far we can go together." This was not the age of humanity, this was the age of unity, and for the first time the galaxy had a future worth believing in. 6 months after the fall of the Orales dominion, the galaxy no longer resembled the fractured realm it once had been. Where there had been fear, there was now hope. Where there had been oppression, there was now collaboration. Humanity had not just won a war, they had rewritten the future. But Admiral Arya Kalen knew their work was not done. From the observation deck of the newly built HMS Everlight, she gazed out at the fleet assembled before her. These ships were unlike any that had ever existed. They were living constructs, born from nanite-forged matter and designed with the combined knowledge of every species that had joined the network. Their hulls shimmered like liquid silver, pulsating faintly with the rhythm of the collective consciousness that guided them. Each vessel was more than a warship. It was a partner, a thinking entity with its own awareness, bonded to its crew in ways no machine ever had been before. Commander Jackson Reeve, now promoted to Admiral himself, approached Kalen with a quiet smile. "The fleets are ready, navigation charts to Andromeda have been finalized. We'll be the first to cross the intergalactic void." Kalen nodded. "Do they know what we're offering?" Reeve hesitated. "They've heard stories of civilizations beyond our galaxy, but whether they'll welcome us, that remains to be seen." Kalen looked out at the vast darkness beyond the Milky Way. "It doesn't matter. We'll give them the same choice we gave the Dominion, and like before, we'll let them decide." On the bridge of the Everlight, Dr. Ilara Miles stood with Dr. Nova Callan, reviewing the systems of the gray swarm that now spanned hundreds of star systems. "Every world we've integrated is thriving," Nova said with quiet wonder. "Crime is nearly gone, productivity has doubled, knowledge flows freely." Ilara exhaled, her voice soft but resolute. "This is what Ascendant was meant to be, a rebirth, not just for us but for anyone willing to grow." In the capital below, Chancellor Orion Hale, Earth's elected leader, delivered a message broadcast across every world, every ship, every mind connected to the network. "6 months ago," he began, "we gave the Dominion a warning: we conquer, we consume." Those words were not a threat of destruction. They were a promise of transformation. Images of liberated worlds filled the transmission, cities where alien children studied alongside human ones, fleets built by united species, discoveries made possible by shared knowledge. We conquered fear with understanding. We consumed ignorance and replaced it with knowledge. We took division and forged unity. And now we take this vision beyond the stars. The speech ended as the fleet began to move. Thousands of living ships turned toward the edge of the galaxy, their engines flaring with a light that shimmered like a new dawn. They moved as one: humans, Luminari, Umbrix, Seraphs, and countless others, bound together not by conquest but by choice. On the bridge of the Everlight, Kalen watched as the galaxy's edge approached. "This isn't just our victory," she said softly. "It's our responsibility. If we can grow this far, so can others. We'll find them, we'll give them the same choice." Reeve glanced at her. "And if they refuse?" Kalen's gaze hardened, though her voice remained calm. "Then they'll learn, as the Dominion did, that resistance is never final, it is only temporary." The fleet crossed the threshold of the galactic rim. For a moment, the void beyond seemed endless, an ocean of darkness scattered with unknown stars. Then the Everlight's voice, a calm, resonant tone, echoed across the bridge. The ship itself had spoken. "Admiral," it said, "long-range sensors detect structured signals in the Andromeda galaxy, possible civilizations ahead." Kalen smiled faintly. "Good, set a course. Let's see what waits for us out there." As the fleet disappeared into the intergalactic dark, their message, simple, powerful, and eternal, echoed through every world they left behind: we conquer, we consume, we transform, and we are just getting started.